Hi, I'm your Grandma Joni, and I've been around for 80 years. And I thought I better take some time in the next few years and record my life. Because you see, when I was young, I never knew anything about the people that came before me. My grandparents came to America from Europe, and I never knew anything about their families other than maybe my grandfather mentioning his mother or my grandmother, a little bit more of stories, but I never met them. I never knew them. I don't even know what they looked like. So I wanted my grandchildren and my great grandchildren and my great grandchildren's children to know that once there was a Grandma Joni and that she was a little spacey at times, but she was a lot of fun, and she loved her life, and she loved everybody in it. Well, not everybody, just the people that were related, and some good friends along the way. But really, really, truly loved them. So where should I begin? Well, let's see. Let's begin at the beginning. That's usually the best place. I was born in Wichita, Kansas, on June 1st, 1930. My mother and father had been married for almost 2.5 years when I was born. My parents came to Wichita. Well, let me tell you how we got to Wichita, because you wonder how people finally settled where. And my grandfather and grandmother came from Europe. My grandmother was from Vienna, from Austria, and my grandfather from Poland, but at those days it was Austria-Poland. And they met. My grandmother was 28 years old, and that was considered an old maid. And she met this gorgeous man, and they fell in love, and they were married. And that was my mother's mother and father. My father's mother and father, well, his father had passed away, he was gone, and his mother was a widow with 4 children, and they both families came to Wichita at different times. My mother's family came in 1908. They had come over and settled in Bayonne, New Jersey. My mother was born there, and my grandfather did not care for it at all, felt it was very dirty, and that New York and New Jersey was chaotic. It was very busy and noisy, and he didn't like that at all. And so he saw an ad in the paper for a ladies' tailor. My grandfather was a tailor, a ladies' tailor in Wichita, Kansas. So he answered the ad. And the Mr. Innes, that was the man who was going to hire him. He owned a department store called Innes's, and he called. He called my grandfather. Said, come over, and well, he didn't call him because they didn't have a telephone in those days. Yeah, they didn't have telephones in those days. Well, they did, but my family didn't have one. But anyway, he went to be interviewed, and there was this man that said, we would like to hire you. And so my grandfather picked up his 3 children, my Uncle Louis and my Aunt Rose and my mother and my grandmother, and they went off to Wichita, Kansas. Now my dad's mother came with the 4 children because she had 2 brothers, and when she became a widow, they said, come to Wichita and we'll take care of you. And that's what happened. And as soon as my parents, who were both 13 at the time, as soon as they saw each other, they fell in love, and they never looked at anyone else. When they were 23, they decided that they wanted to get married, but it was not a very good situation because the 2 families did not care for each other. It was like a Hatfield and McCoy's. They just didn't get along. But my parents wanted to get married, and so they eloped, even though they were told they shouldn't. But they were both 21 years old. My goodness, they could do that. So they went to the Reform rabbi in Wichita, and he married them. But when my grandfather found out, he was so furious that he actually ran the rabbi out of town. And that was the story that was always told to me, and the story that everyone in Wichita knew about. I was born at St. Francis Hospital. Let's see, it was a Sunday morning that my mother went into the hospital. My father had to carry her, and you had to go up steps in the hospital to get to the main floor. And my father was very thin, and I didn't ever think he was that strong, but he must have been, because my mother was very large with child, and he was able to get her up the steps. And I was born at 7:45 that night. We lived with my grandparents. I think maybe at the beginning we didn't. When I was very small, I don't know, because I don't remember those things. The first thing that I do remember is it was 1932, it was 1932, very close to 1933, because I think I was 3 years old. And we were going, my mother and my father and myself, we were going to Pennsylvania to live. And I remember being on the train. My father didn't have a job. It was during the Depression. People were out of work, and it was a terrible time, and there just wasn't anything for my father to do in Wichita to, make any money to support his family. So he went to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And the second thing I remember is I was taking a nap, and when I woke up, my mother had a chocolate cupcake with a candle, and she sang happy birthday, and that was my 4th birthday. Then I remember we came back to Wichita, and by that time my grandfather had gone into the uniform business. He was going to make not only uniforms for organizations like the Knights of Columbus, or I can't even think of some of the others. I'll think in a minute. But he would make these uniforms, and so my Uncle Louis, who also needed a job, went to work for him, or with him. And then my grandmother also worked there. She was a fabulous hand sewer, and I mean, her stitches looked like they were done on a machine. And the machines that they had were the pedals. They had pedals that they had to pedal up and down in order to make the needle go up and down, so they could sew. They didn't have electric ones. My father came back, and he went to work with my grandfather and my uncle, and they found Fruhoff Southwest Uniform Company. About this time, we were living over, or actually in the front of the shop. The shop was in the back. We were on the front, on the 2nd floor in downtown Wichita. And I remember my playground when I was 4 and 5 was walking up and down, I must have been almost 5, and then into 5, close to 6, that I would walk up and down the streets downtown Wichita. I went to school. I started school in kindergarten, Carlton Elementary. I remember like it was yesterday that my mother took me, and I was crying, and I was pulling away. I didn't want to go, and I was crying hysterically, and she said, "No, you have to go." Well, I went for 2 days, and then I decided I didn't want to go again, and I never finished the kindergarten. Then we moved from there to Alcott Street, and I started school there at Alcott Elementary School in Wichita. And the Wichita Children's Home was right around the corner. And so all my classmates were orphans. And it was really sad, because I felt so bad for them that they didn't have, parents. But they had each other. And I was an only child, and they felt sorry for me. So, it's very interesting. I knew I was an only child, but that was okay with me. My grandparents lived with us too. We all lived together, and then eventually we moved to South Rutan, and my uncle and aunt and my cousin Fred and my cousin Irma lived in one house, and my grandparents and my mom and dad and myself lived in the house next door. It was like a compound. And we all got along pretty well. I mean, well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, you can't live together all the time without someone kind of causing a confusion or upset or jealous or whatever. And it happened occasionally, but most of the time it was very pleasant. And I loved living next to Irma and Fred. I adored Irma. She played the piano, and it was wonderful. And my Uncle Lou had a record player downstairs, and it was Edison records, and they were real thick. And when everybody was upstairs, I would be downstairs with those Edison records, and I would sing my little heart out. I had the best time. I went to Sunnyside School. I finished the 6th grade there, and then I went on to junior high at Roosevelt, and that was a great experience too. I got I was meeting more people, and I was growing up. And about that time, my mother said, I have a surprise for you. You're going to have a little brother or sister. We don't know. I was hysterical. I was so excited, and yet I was very worried because I had been an only child until I was 11 3/4. And here this person, male or female, was going to come, to my house. Well, it turned out to be my brother, and I loved him. Oh, I did indeed. I'll never forget when the first day he was home, and he was sleeping in his crib, and I was resting on the bed, and I looked at him and I thought, oh my gosh, this is the one person that has the same blood that I have. He's my brother. Although there were times when I wanted to shoot him. I mean, he was a typical little brother. Well, from there we moved, and by this time, like I said, I was in junior high. I was starting to be very, I started to like boys, and I would go downtown and I would get makeup, and it was, it was fun. Wichita was great. My teenage years were wonderful. I was very active in organizations. Young Judea. I was president of Young Judea. I was the youngest president of Junior Hadassah in the United States. I was dancing, ballroom dancing, with a young man by the name of Harold Orchid, and we would do exhibition dancing. He threw me over his shoulder and I landed on my back. I think that's been my problem for all my life with backaches, but at the time I felt very glamorous. I really did, and I must have been at least 14 at the time. When I was growing up, we didn't have things like you have today. I mean, we didn't have television. Who even thought about television? We didn't have credit cards. We didn't have ballpoint pens. We didn't have frozen foods. We didn't have fast foods. I mean, you could go to King's X and get a hamburger, but then you could really go to the drive-in, but there was no such thing as a drive-through. We didn't have FM radios. I did have a radio that I had by my bed, and every night I would listen to the music that came from New York, from the beautiful downtown hotel on Fifth Avenue or wherever it was, because I had no idea what New York was all about. I never heard of it. An ice cream cost a nickel. So did a Pepsi. In fact, that was it was Pepsi Cola hits the spot, 12 full ounces, that's a lot. Twice as much for a nickel, too. Pepsi-Cola is the drink for